Hello, everyone! Woo! Yes, welcome to Boshi's Place! Thank you all so much for coming here. Isn't it wonderful that we live in a time where spaces like this exist, where we can throw events like this and show like these incredible games with and have conversations with all these incredible people? One more round of applause. I'm so excited to be here. So, this event is entitled Games Against the Empire, and this is part of Game Design Games, which is an event, a series of events co-sponsored by the NYU Game Center and Empire State Development Fund. There's multiple of these events happening all around the city this week. We even have some more here at Boshi's later on in the week. If you want to know all the information of these events, you can go to the website for Game Design Days, and we also have some flyers over on the table back there. But at Boshi's on Thursday, there is a zine jam in the morning. On Thursday night, we have the Games Against the Empire exhibition. So we have a bunch of games for you to play, including some games from some of our panelists up here. And then we also have an outdoors game session on Saturday afternoon. It was originally Thursday, it was moved to Saturday because of potential rain. And that will come before No Quarter at the NYU Game Center, an amazing exhibition that where 4 artists or artist collaborations are putting on games specifically for the event. So thank you so much to Boshi's Place for hosting this event. If you're curious what Boshi's Place is, you made it here, so maybe you have a little bit of an idea. But this is an event space that a bunch of artists, creators, thinkers, academics, etc. Are working together to put on events like this, to highlight experimental games and marginalized creators and have a space where we can talk and play and think. And so they're doing an excellent job. This is the culmination of a lot of that work. So thank you to everyone at Boshi's Place for all that you put into to make things like this happen. It's so wonderful. Yes. Another round of applause, I love it. If you have to go to the bathroom is outside of these doors to the right. And if you want to know more about Boshi's, feel free to talk to the bartender for some drinks and camaraderie. We have some non-alcoholic drinks tonight. They're all $3 if you'd like to consume any of them. And there's plenty of Boshi's members floating around. So if you want to learn more, you'll be easy to spot them after the event. So before we get into the panel, I'm going to introduce Yusuf to come up here and talk about the Palestinian youth movement. Give it up for Yusuf.
Thanks so much, Emily, and thank you to everyone at Boshi's Place for inviting me. My name is Yusuf, and I'm here with the Shut It Down for Palestine Coalition. Our coalition is a broad movement of organizations consisting of the Palestinian Youth Movement, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, Nodatol, South Asian Left Movement, and a whole lot of other orgs united in our solidarity with the Palestinian national liberation struggle. So over the last year, through our organizing and mobilization efforts, we've been able to create probably the largest sustained mass political movement oriented against US imperialism here in the United States. And we definitely want to keep that going. But I'm here today specifically to talk about our big fundraising drive with the Middle East Children Alliance. The Middle East Children Alliance is one of the few organizations that is able to actually give direct aid to families on the ground in Gaza. So if you feel like you want to do something to help, one of the best things that you can do is donate money either through cash or the QR code here on this donation box. The second thing that I would ask all of you to do is to please join us on November 29th at our next mass mobilization at Columbus Circle on the International Day of Solidarity with the Palestinian people. And then finally, we want you to organize with us and take part in our movement. And if you have any questions or you'd like to get involved, feel free to flag me on your way out and we can get you connected. And yeah, thank you so much again for letting me take up this space, and I really appreciate it. And I'm so excited to see what we have in store for the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yusuf. So I'm going to start by also introducing an organization, myself. My name is Emily Koonce, and I am a games community organizer, game designer, writer based in Chicago. I'm part of this, can we go back a slide for a second? This amazing organization called Night City. We are an event space in Chicago in the neighborhood of Logan Square, and we have a mission similar to Boshi's, where we're trying to bring exhibitions, resources, art to the people of Chicago, and we are fortunate enough to be collaborating with Boshi's Place on this event. We work together to make this panel happen, as well as to make the exhibition on Thursday happen. One of my collaborators, David Antognoli, is here, also from Night City, and Seb Galvez, who is back in Chicago, also contributed to the organization of this as well. So it's cool to also work across scenes in different cities to make things like this happen. And I'm proud to be a part of Night City and helping organize people there in the same way the Boshi's crew is organizing people here. So yeah, I am a game designer. I released a game earlier this year called The Crockpot. Thank you. I also do some like weird experimental like performance art, dance, interactive pieces, exploring what that means. And my specialty is in folk games. So I love studying drinking games, games you play sitting in a circle in the park, games you play at camp, etc. And I'm really fortunate to be here with this amazing panel of people who I am going to let introduce themselves. So Paolo, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Yeah, thank you for having me. Yeah, so my name is Paolo Pedercini. I'm here from Pittsburgh. Sorry I couldn't be here with you. So yeah, I'm mostly make games as Molleindustria. That's the sort of like project name. I made about 40 games since 2003. I got a few slides here, just I was thinking of the ones that maybe are more related to the theme. Going back a million years, I made a game called Oligarchy in the second slide that was about the relationship basically between oil companies, you're leading a vertically integrated oil company and you're sort of like manipulating politics, American politics, in order to expand your activities. So it's a mix between a management game and kind of like a political simulation. Next slide. I don't know if it's very clear, but yeah, also a long time ago, I made this game called Phone Story, which is a game about the kind of like the hidden side of electronic manufacturing. It's a phone game, iPhone game, and Android game in which the phone sort of like starts to talk to you and narrates the story of itself, basically its own story. Starting from the coltan mines in Congo, moving to the assembly factories in China and the Foxconn factories. So this is 2009 when this kind of issues were particularly hot, and all the way to the end of cycle and the so-called recycling in some country in Southeast Asia. Another one, next slide. It's called Unmanned, and it's sort of like a narrative game about a day in the life of a drone pilot. So you're sort of like following this guy that is leading this split life, existing in basically Nevada, like in Las Vegas, with his own family, while also flying a drone somewhere in Pakistan. And dealing with this sort of like a split screen and a double task and this sort of like multitasking, sort of like imagining the inner life of this new kind of soldier, this 21st century type of soldier. And in the last slide, I have this is the game that I guess will be exhibited in the space you are in, or maybe it's already there somewhere. but it's the most recent one, the New York Times simulator, in which you are basically like taking the role as the editor of the New York Times, but it's kind of interchangeable with all sort of liberal sort of mainstream media, and you have to basically like build consent for the ongoing genocide of Palestinian people by kind of manipulating public opinion, but manipulating the headlines essentially, and deciding what gets into the front page and what doesn't get into the front page. And you also have to deal with other powers such as the police and the wealthy people that are sort of like stakeholder of your newspaper. So these are just like a sample related, perhaps more related to the theme of the empire and imperialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Kas, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I'm really honored to be speaking here with Paolo and everybody else. I think his work speaks for itself, and I think I'd like to, get to a point with my work where I feel the same kind of compelling ability to look back over it and say, here's this ideology coming through. Myself, I studied game design and game development at New York University as well. I graduated in 2018, and since then I've been working on a game called Unto Mazyland, Unto Infinity. It's a very personal game, but it didn't really start out that way. It did start out primarily as, I'd say, an anti-imperialist endeavor, one that was meant to be a critical of the U.S. relationship between the United States and Iran, where my family is from, and also to sort of look into how collective memory has sort of erased a lot of the experience of the actual revolution, of kind of ending up in exile, and what that kind of did to my family, which leads to some catastrophic consequences in the game. As a result as well, it's also a forward-looking game, one that tried to make the argument, from the beginning, that this wasn't just history I was dealing with, but a sort of active process. And I think where the world has ended up since I started working on this game, unfortunately, has, for me, it proven there is some correctness to this theory, which is that imperialism is a force that has not been defeated, right? We're fighting it everywhere in the world still, and it's a task that I take very seriously. In addition to being a game developer, I joined the Party for Socialism and Liberation a couple years ago in 2022, and have also been organizing against the Palestinian genocide here in West Virginia since I left New York. So I was working with the Shut It Down for Palestine committee as well. So glad to see that someone is here representing me.
Thank you, Kas. Would you like to go, Yasmine?
Hi. Okay, yeah. Hi, I'm Yasmine. My artist name is also Gabbah Baya. I got my master's from the NYU Game Center. I've been making games about the Middle East and Palestine since 2016. I'm Palestinian from Gaza, and a lot of my work is about sort of how can we, as like indigenous Native people, create a framework and sort of preserving and keeping our cultural memories, landmarks, and histories. So a lot of my work, if you see above, is I do a lot of 3D scanning of areas in Palestine that have either been destroyed or have an alternate history today, and then reinsert them in my games so that we as Palestinians can create our own narratives and be reconnected in a different way. Because often the settler colonialism, we're literally just stopped and we do not have that access. So also thinking about accessibility and how we can preserve our stories when dealing with empire, right? So yeah, and I also do my latest game, Pomegranates, where 3 different landmarks in Gaza that have been destroyed since October 7th, and 3D modeling them and recreating them in my games and putting them into a space where they can live and also just be experienced by other people and other Palestinians. And also just thinking about like alternative futures as ways as we as like indigenous people or Native people can sort of like fight back against these powers and continue to grow into our own selves and really define our histories instead of letting other people define them for us. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Luke, I'm gonna hand the mic off to you next.
Hi everyone, my name is Luke. I'm with the Maoist Communist Union. Also just, really glad to be here as well, to be talking with all of you and talking with the other panelists. I'm not a game dev. I'm excited to learn a lot about that, hopefully. But I do some writing in my free time. I do consider myself an artist. And so, definitely have a lot of thoughts on the role of art. And we, as an organization, sorry, the crackling. Consider this question of art to be a really important one. We have a couple different fronts of work. We do studies online. We're running one right now. We also do studies locally, where our branches are. We do some work in the trade unions. But we also work with this group, Art for the People. You can see their logo up there. They're a anti-capitalist art collective that's based in South Florida. And artists from all different backgrounds are part of it. You have writers, poets, musicians, painters, et cetera, and really centering the art they make around a specific anti-capitalist and political idea. The first show that they put on was about how neither of the bourgeois Democratic parties serve your interests. Neither Republicans nor Democrats are having the interests of the people, of the working class at heart. And across history, you can see in all these different revolutionary movements, in the Russian revolutionary movement, the Chinese, all over, the cultural movement and the revolutionary artist movement that accompanied these revolutions were critical for their success. And that art is an incredibly powerful tool that can not just be a mirror for reality, but really a hammer to shape it. And that we see this question of, one, building a revolutionary movement in the US as a very important thing to be working towards, and ultimately a socialist revolution. But on top of that, building a revolutionary artist movement in this country. There's a great Mao quote where he says, "A army without culture is a dull army, and a dull army does not win battles." Art is not just something on the side that can maybe get people interested in these politics and these movements. It's something integral that can not only work to inspire people to join up, but also inspire them to transform society, and that the art in and of itself can transform society as well. Video games, I think it goes without saying, is an incredibly pervasive form of this art in our culture. And so it's very important that we're considering how to interact with video games, how to make them sharper, make them more positive, not just make a million FIFA games and Black Ops till the end of time, but really things that are going to push people and make them think and inspire them.
Thank you so much. And Michael.
Hello, I'm Mikael Jakobsson. I'm the research coordinator for the MIT Game Lab, and I am a game studies researcher and also an interaction designer, and I sometimes make games, but usually in the lab we just make kind of design explorations ending up in prototypes. But every now and then I make a game on the side with an art and design collective called Popsicleta. I think the main reason I'm here today is because I co-authored a book called Playing Oppression together with Professor Mary Flanagan from Dartmouth College. And what we did in that book was we were tracing the phenomenon of colonialist themes in board games, basically as far back in history as we could. and up to present day with a little peek into the future as well. And the arguments that we make in the book are basically that there's an awful lot of board games with colonialist themes. They are so popular that they are kind of setting the norm for what type of board games that are being made, and there's more and more of them coming out every year. And the sort of second tier argument that we're making is that it's not just thematically that these games are about colonialism, but they also employ colonialist game mechanics to make the arguments that they are making, whether the designers realize or not. And we are sort of arguing for the need of breaking up that that type of thinking when it comes to basically the colonialist mindset when it comes to designing board games.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much all again for being here. I'm really excited to start this conversation off. So something that I am wondering about, since we're all here because art means something to us in some way. We make it, we consume it, we believe in its potential to change things. But we also, all different art exists within an industry that often bolsters art that virtue signals being political without maybe actually enacting change. Yeah, you can just mute that for a second. So my first question to you all is, what are the qualities of actually radical revolutionary art that can effectively cause change or materially cause change? What does a piece of art possess when it has the power to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things I think that goes into this idea of revolutionary art that goes beyond just something being a critique of the system around us, though that's not a bad start. But I think a pretty key thing is putting forward an alternative. I think a film that sticks out to me is Don't Look Up, which is not an example of something that's so revolutionary. It's putting forward a critique of climate change and how our government approaches it, but what's the message at the end? It's we're all going to die and there's no hope, which is not very revolutionary. It's very much saying no, change is impossible. It's either no change forever until death, basically, which is incredibly cynical and nihilistic, and that's incredibly pervasive in our culture. So I think just a basic thing that's quite important to look for is this piece of art really putting forward an alternative? Is it just laying out some imminent critique of the society around us, which again has a purpose and has a role and isn't necessarily a bad thing, but what it eventually lands on and what it's saying, is it really saying we can change society, or is it throwing its hands up and shrugging and saying, not really?
I am a big fan of games that are overtly political and are kind of calls to action. But I think that you don't really have to go that path to be sort of working for change. Right now I'm working on a project on settler colonialism in Anglo-America. And I had a student who was working with me who was specifically looking at the representation of Native Americans in these games. And unsurprisingly, they are often seen as the part of nature that needs to be overcome. So modernity and commercialism can thrive. Or they are seen as some kind of evil obstacle that you have to be afraid of. And we had a class of high school students visiting from a tribe in northern Maine, and I talked to their teacher about what is important in your life, what do you like doing, and he said, well, in the winter we go ice fishing a lot. And I was just thinking that even a board game about ice fishing in northern Maine would be an almost revolutionary political act in the climate that we have within board games, because it would stand out as like a sore thumb compared to all the other representations of Native Americans. Just for one thing, because it would be here and now, and in these board games, Native Americans are always part of the past, and people in America often think that Native Americans don't exist anymore. So I think just little things like that can actually be important.
Yeah, I'm curious, especially, hello. I'm curious, especially to hear from like Kas and Yasmine about your work both engages with like familial and cultural history, and how giving space to that feels impactful to you, to your community. If that, like the revolutionary potential of just giving space to your story.
I think that, for one, it's, I think that cultural landmarks, cultural artifacts, all of those things are what makes us as a people. It's really what defines us. And the loss of those things basically continues the loss of that group of people and their cultural history. So it's sort of this like attempt or like grab, this scramble of trying to collect everything you can as it's disappearing from you. And the thing is, it's not just about me, right? Like, yes, like I'm Palestinian and I come from this background, but creating work from a certain place, especially like from Gaza, becomes like a community effort, right? It becomes like everybody becomes a part of it. Like when we were sourcing stories for our game, my partner and I, Wanho, a huge part of it was like, okay, well, we need to have conversations with Palestinians. We need to look at stories of what's been actually happening right now. We need to collect these images, try to get more images from certain people, and it becomes like a really interesting, kind of beautiful exercise on how much people also just want to work with you and sort of preserving that history. So yeah, I think it's like, we need to do these things in order to keep our connection to them so we're not getting lost along the way.
Yeah, I think I hear a lot of interesting points made, honestly, because I think for me the revolutionary aspect of making art sometimes is not so much in terms of the external process, but the internal process that you go through when making something. And in terms of my work on Ontomasialand, I feel like the amount of time I've put into it over the years and the way that I've kind of worked on it in bursts and then taken time off and then kind of developed politically, and the world has kind of changed around me. You know, understanding sort of Marxist and socialist theory and the idea of like what a dialectical process is, where, you know, two things are in motion and moving towards some sort of like transformation. By working on something, I think we can kind of come to a major change with ourselves, right? Like for me, what drove me to make something like that was basically my Uncle Ramin's suicidal act was impossible for me to understand at the time. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And so trying to understand that and like what made it happen, what were the kind of core components of that, was also similar to what I think she was just mentioning about, you know, actually engaging in a collective process in my family where, you know, instead of like there being like a a particular item or thing. It was more like people's memories about this person that kind of drove the work and starting to talk back and forth. So in that sense, I guess I would disagree with the idea that I think revolutionary art has to do more than criticize or particularly paint an alternative vision. I think there's space for both, kind of like what Michael was saying, which is that the context of a piece or of the particularity of it is really important. There's not really a universal rule to what makes something a revolutionary piece or what makes it capable of changing the world. And I would go as far to say that even if you just change yourself in the process of making something, that can enable you to then change the world, right? Like, where these things are interrelated. And so for me, it's been like, to be honest, if I hadn't engaged in that process, I don't know if I ever would have even gone to therapy, which is like pretty crazy thinking back to it. I would be a very different person by now. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that both of you discussed like the labor going into the things that you made, since I think oftentimes it's you forget that so much of taking a critical approach to art is also taking a critical approach to how these things come to be it something like Paolo's phone story that like talks about how we even get like the devices that we're using to play these games, or be it like the community that you're working with, the labor that goes into bringing people together to talk about this thing that you want to express, or as Kas was saying, internally, that like you can have this, the labor that you do internally while making something is also can be extremely effective. So do you have any advice for methods of doing that, for being able to remain critical of the labor of what you're making as a creator, as well as like instead of just focusing on the product itself? Yeah.
Okay. I did my undergrad and graduate and PhD studies in northern Sweden, and that at the time in the 90s, participatory design was very big there. It had started in Scandinavia and was very much sort of the method that we were all drilled in, and it was all about change happens at the factory floor. You need to, as a designer, you need to ally yourself with the stakeholders that don't have power on their side, all these kinds of socialist ideas. And when I drifted from design studies to game studies, I wasn't sure where that method would fit, because I didn't think that the players were the workers, but more sort of recently I've realized that the stakeholders are the people that the games are about. So for me, it's about cultural engagement, and as a white male, design as facilitation. So making sure that I can use my skills to amplify underprivileged voices. So just as an example, when we made a board game about Puerto Rico, about the current debt crisis, the game is called Promesa. It's only in prototype stage right now. What we did was we started by going to San Juan and do a workshop and ask people what was important to them here and now, sort of as a contrast to the existing board games about Puerto Rico that are all made by white Europeans that are set in during the Spanish colonial era, and you're basically trying to be the most efficient slave owner. So we wanted to present a counter image to that, and by doing that workshop and starting to put mechanics to that, we came up with a game that is about the debt crisis, but it's also about the struggle of everyday life in Puerto Rico. So I think cultural engagement for me is very important.
Yeah, amazing. Just to think about the that games. I think so often I personally forget that as someone who works by themselves or a small team, that there's so many different ways you can go about making games, and that there's this huge culture that you have to interact with, of people who make games, of other people who make art, of people who are from a shared heritage, to use in that labor process as a way to recenter what your work can be about. I'm curious, as we talk about, we're talking a lot about games. Is there anything about games themselves as a medium that has a greater potential for doing all these revolutionary things we're talking about? I think in the games world we tout a lot games are interactive, and because of that they have these special powers, and I wonder if but we're also talking about how just expressing something in any form, be it something about your heritage, that maybe in any kind of medium too, is in itself meaningful. Is there something that games specifically does bring to the table as a medium?
I mean, so I'll start with this. So yeah, in 2016, I was always formally a fine artist, painting and drawing. But then I realized that the concepts that I were actually interested in felt like they were moving sort of past the mediums that I was working in. There became a disconnect between the mediums and the concepts, right? So that's why I really transitioned into games, because I felt like there are certain sort of conceptual things that games as an artist it's easier to just handle and deal with and build, right? It's much easier thinking about creating a universe for Palestinian people using the medium of games than a painting. So for me specifically, I think more of, as a creator, it's a really powerful tool. Does it actually have the ability to, you play a game and then you're oh my God, I learned so much and now I'm gonna change my perspective on climate change? Possibly. I do think that there's some potential there. Is there more potential than a painting or a photograph? I mean, I think it's kind of difficult, because it's a lot of the times when we play games, sort of a part of our brain can be missing. I see people play games a lot and just skip through all the text, right? So it's it depends, what level of engagement are you, what level of engagement are you having with the game? Are you actually paying attention to what's happening? But I do think that embodying a character, being in a universe, can possibly give you more of a semblance of an idea of something. And that's why I moved into that field, to try to create that idea and give it to the players to experience. But I'm not sure if it works.
Yeah, I think, there's an argument to be made that maybe before video games, film was really this medium that in a lot of ways could capture the contradictions of society better, because not only could it, just as any art medium, capture those in and of itself, but also capture and portray the contradictions within other forms of art. In music or paintings, you can have characters looking at paintings, talking about them in movies, listening to music. The audience itself is then also viewing that painting, listening to that song. And with video games, you have all that. And yeah, people, I think what you're getting out of kind of the approach is another pretty important question too. But it can absolutely, not only can you do all these things that, let's say, film can, but you're also immersed in this. And have such a potentially stronger connection to what's going on, and a whole other just dimension for the artist to play around with and use to their advantage really to deepen whatever idea they're trying to get across. And yeah, I think what you were saying about like how people are approaching it is a huge thing too. People use video games a lot as escapes. Just play hours a day of some competitive video game or anything else, and use it to kind of forget about what's happening. And that is a real risk. It's something that video games play into a lot. And think of something like Cyberpunk. It sort of misses the point of what we can really do with the level of immersion we can give you. They go in this route of, well, actually, we're going to give you this fake life to live. And I mean, not actually, but really something to escape into. But we don't want to be doing that with art. We want people to be thinking and not escaping reality, but actually confronting it in a different way, in some ways safer and easier way, but in a lot of ways a sharper and harder way. Yeah.
Thank you. I wonder, so we talked about how all these games came to be, and that in itself is can be its own revolutionary process. But I'm curious to like turn this discussion to like the industry at large and how the industry functions, and how games that or a lot of the games that I think we consider to be radical are often not those that are celebrated by the industry, either like in these institutions that give out awards and platform things, but also even just on the like through the platforms that we use to show our games, like Steam and the App Store. And so I'm curious here, especially from you, Paolo, because I know you've had some games banned from the App Store before, of like how do we work around or through some of these like institutional blockages to show our art and like let people engage with it.
Oh boy, I took so many notes to try to answer the previous two questions.
Oh yeah, go ahead. The floor is yours.
No. Let's move on. Do you really want me? Because I'm not gonna unmute myself spontaneously. You have to.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, please.
I'm that guy. I'm shy. No, in terms of what like games can bring that maybe other media can't, or might be like weaker on that. To me, like when I'm asked that question, usually I gravitate toward these two things. One is role playing, which is a fairly game specific type of experience that you do, and the other one is role playing as in not just identifying with a character, but living living in a situation that is perhaps designed to create some kind of like a moral dilemma, for example. And another one is related to the more like systemic and procedural nature of games. Games are systems of rules, and they can be quite effective at presenting, depicting also abstract systems such as the economic and political systems that we inhabit. So this is something that like for example, like a cinema, storytelling cannot do as well, because it is much more reliant on characters and stories and narrative arcs, and so you have to follow somebody in order to understand the larger system. So I think that's something that games I think can do pretty well, and also like maybe the idea of making complexity compelling, making like sort of like navigating complexity as not as something that gives you panic, gives you sort of like but it's something that is kind of like interesting to wrestle with. I think like demagogues and politicians succeed also because they can present very simple solutions to very complex, bigger problems and global crises and things like that. Like we don't understand exactly how inflation works, but we can always blame the scapegoat group. And I think games can sort of like be like, actually, yeah, inflation is complex. The debt crisis in Puerto Rico is complex, but we can sort of like understand it and play around with it and not be intimidated by it. So that was catching up with the previous question.
Yeah, thank you. That was a lot to think about. I think consistent with these other answers are like being able to play in a world or play in a system. I think is definitely a power of games that we talk about a lot. That we can. There's all these levers to work when you put a player in a system to interact with that aren't as it has its own kind of passivity, I guess, as we discussed. That you can get into a kind of flow state where you're not critically engaging, but when you can enact that moment where your player is conscious of what's happening, it can be pretty powerful. But I guess back to my previous question, if we have this potential in games, how do we let this potential thrive in the midst of this industry, and what this industry chooses to platform and not platform through the various institutions we have to go through to show games, to produce board games, etc.
I have an answer for this. I also have a response to some of what Alex. I think first, just on this question of systems and games and embodiment as a player, and I think one of the interesting things about a lot of Paolo's games, about these really highly simulated experiences where you are critical of all these different pieces of a system, it's actually astoundingly good at almost making you feel like an amoral character, right? You can play as like the person running a McDonald's empire and feel great. Like you can play as a horrible politician and actually enjoy the role. You know what I mean? I think it's funny because a lot of AAA games, or a lot of the big industry games, pride themselves on exposing moral choices to players. As if that is in itself a revolutionary thing to do, to allow you to make a good or evil choice. There's been a lot of criticism of this, and I think there's a lack of understanding there of like what it means to actually be embodied in the world and at the subject or of the whim of one of these systems, right? I think as a result, as the industry has kind of monopolized over this past couple decades, we've seen actually less and less choices being made at the level of developers, and more choices being made at like the top level of this kind of pyramid of the system, of financial forces and bankers and people who've acquired all these big game companies. I think the obvious answer is we need a general games union that people actually join across the industry, and to unify our efforts into a single organization that's willing to fight these people all across the industry, where people are willing to, sacrifice a lot to make a better world for ourselves. Rather than flee the industry or go and do our own separate projects, we need to find a way to resolve the contradictions to make something like that that does exist in other art industries, in film and in other places. And it is actually being built right now. The biggest movement at the moment is led as Code CWA. It's an extension of the Communication Workers of America. And we've seen a lot of unionization in the past couple of years. So it is a movement that's happening. There are people leading that. But I think there is still a question of what do people on the margins do? I think we're doing it right now, right? It's finding third spaces, connecting one another, and building up these spaces as much as we can, and providing each other these kind of resources to get organized, basically.
Kas, where would you start if you wanted to organize the people that you're working with?
Well, I know Code CW Day offers recurring classes every 2 weeks if you want to learn about how to organize your workspace. You know, there's other ways to reach out to unionization efforts directly if you don't want to go through Code CWA. But if you do follow them, you know, they've done a bunch of successful campaigns. You can look at the campaigns that have been successful. There's things like Tender Clause, which unionized, which is rather small. We have people, NYU alumni who were part of that. We have NYU alumni who are part of, you know, Ravenwood, the QA studio. You know, there's all these connections that are around us. We need to look at them seriously and learn from them, right? And reach out to those people and start the motions, right?
Thank you, Kas. I'm curious, Paolo, how you have gone about, again, since you have had games banned that are radical and engage in heavy critiques of the industry. How have you worked through that, or what are your methods of continuing to platform your games despite the kind of industry working against you?
Sure, but was it even radical, really? Not so much. I mean, it was like an educational game, really. It wasn't more radical than what you will find in just like a magazine or like Teen Vogue these days, you know. So it wasn't like really that over the top. But at that point, there was a kind of like an interesting conversation that basically Apple started with the idea that apps were not really art, they were not culture, essentially. Apps were not meant to be culture, and games were not meant to be culture. And if you want to make culture, if you want to criticize, you know, a religion, you write a book or something like that. And that was like embedded in their guidelines. So they sort of kind of like used that. And so like the game that was really meant to be about the production process of consumer electronic and electronic consumerism and basically e-waste and other related topics kind of like became a game or became a project about basically like market censorship. The fact that there are monopolistic sort of platforms, and the Apple Store is one of them, but also like the Google Play Store is one of them, and Steam essentially is like a monopoly or like an oligopoly in practical terms. And so there are those marketplaces that are the kind of new capitalists that are wielding an incredible amount of power on you know, what games are you know, emerging to the top, and also what games are really not allowed. It's the same thing for, you know, the streaming platform we are on, Twitch, that can basically like arbitrarily decide. They just released recent you know, guidelines. Arbitrarily decide, you know, what is hate speech, for example, or what's not allowed. So that is definitely a problem. Like there is a problem of distribution. Essentially, this is where I'm trying to get to. Yes, you can make your own cool independent games. Like I'm mostly making games by myself, you know, detached from any commercial sort of like need, and I'm in a very privileged situation to be able to do that, to just like not care about sales essentially. But still, like you can even like with you know, the closest to full independence you can have. You will still have to deal with distribution issues potentially. So yeah, how to deal with that is well, it's I'm kind of like an all of the above type of person, and like everything that we say so far is to me like oh, here's a big menu of things that could be done and should be done. Big games, you know, AAA games that are not going to go away anytime soon. Even if I definitely wish, but they are not going to go away anytime soon. So unionization is the proper, you know, way to address that, and like there is a unionization, there is like independence and cooperative, and then there is essentially creating alternative networks, whether they are in-person sort of like spaces like Boshi's, or whether they are like alternative, slightly more humane, and let's say like welcoming places like Itch.io as an alternative to Steam, for example.
I'm curious too how all of, so we're talking about distribution of video games, and like we are fortunate in some ways. There's like a lot of strengths of video games being this medium, not only in how they're like how people can engage with systems, but also that they're digital, that they can exist online. So if you have access to like a computer with the internet, you can play like a browser game that's like a very powerful medium. You don't have to go to an art gallery. You don't have to go to a museum. But we also have the world of board games that exists within the games industry. And I'm curious how you think these challenges and I guess advantages work in distribution for board games and games with like physical components.
Well, first of all, I think you're painting a picture of how easy access to video game is that forgets a little bit that I think the limited resource is attention, and there's hundreds of video games coming out every day, so if you put an interesting video game on a website, that doesn't necessarily do anything. So in a way, I think it might even be easier to get attention for a board game, even if you're self-publishing it, because there's hundreds and hundreds of board games coming out every year, but it's not quite the same kind of unrelentless stream of intention-seeking titles coming out. But otherwise, the landscape is exactly the same. We don't call it AAA in board games, but the tier of games that have a first print run of over 10,000 copies it can't really do anything interesting, just like AAA video games can't. So everything that is, to me, interesting is happening through alternative pathways to from designers to players. So it's more like print-on-demand models, or print and play, or other kinds of crowdfunding ways of making sure that you can get enough money to actually make the game so that you can get it out there before you actually start selling it.
Yeah, I think in both board games and in like some of the examples that we use of how to platform some of our games that maybe aren't platformed very well by the industry. We talk a lot about like being in physical space together and the power that can have. And I think a lot about how video games, like, we live in a culture that's like very isolationist. I think that's a big problem of what we have right now is a lot of people who don't feel connected to the society at large. They don't feel connected to their peers. They don't feel connected to the world. And games are a medium that we like, that are historically consumed at home alone a lot of the time. I mean, other than we had like arcades, and then with the kind of the death of the arcade and the rise of home consoles, and it became like a more I guess like isolationist practice. So I wonder, I guess in your experience with your own work and organizing, how do we bring people together to play, especially video games? Like, how does that become? Do you think there's a way that culture becomes more like connection in person based, and we can have those the same discussions? So I mean, board games, I guess, have this as an advantage because in order to play a lot of them. We have tools online that you can play board games with, but a vast majority of them are meant to be sitting around a table. So I'm curious to just hear your thoughts on, like, do you think that's something that can help bring people together if we like created more of a culture of playing video games together publicly or in these third spaces? Cass, do you have any opinions on this as someone who organizes events?
Yeah, I think it does depend on the game and the context in which it's meant to be showed. I feel like, at least when it comes to my own game, I found that the strongest experiences are sitting down with somebody one-on-one and kind of watching them play the game. Not necessarily being in a crowded space that's meant for socializing. I think there's space for both of these things, and we definitely need these third places to bring back the aspect of social gaming and the kind of conversations that generates. And like we talked about with role playing, I think multiplayer and social games are really important for like breaking down barriers that do exist between people in the way that we've become very isolated in our daily lives. But another thing I've noticed is that a lot of people are constantly playing social games, but they're playing them at home. They are playing multiplayer games from home all the time. Most of my friends who are outside of games play more multiplayer games than me, and are playing almost every night. 1 or 2 hours at least talking to their friends. And when I join people playing those types of games, I don't really feel like people even play for the game. It's just to socialize. So clearly people are wanting to socialize, and I think wanting to find ways to do that in a way that allows them to feel free, allows them to feel free to be themselves. Maybe that, just talking to somebody feels limited in a way compared to what we might have used to have in a world where we weren't all kind of atomized as much. So at the end of the day, I think it's all about changing culture. I mean, I think organizing is about the uphill battle is, whether it's games or just trying to bring people around politics. People aren't talking to each other as much as they used to, so even their own neighbors, right? A lot of people don't know them.
Yasmine, I'm curious, as someone who talked about how so much of your creative process involves bringing people together and to talk about culture and share stories, do you find that there's a connection with like the product of what you make and like having the same effect or some kind of rhyme? Does it feel really different?
Yeah, I think it's difficult because games are sort of this thing that it's supposed, unless it's an MMO, it is an individual isolating experience, especially like we're talking about like embodiment and all these other things. So like if you're in a space with a bunch of your friends, like playing my game, for example, it'd be much harder to embody that character and have that experience, of like going around this city and stuff like that. So it's difficult because I feel like what's the goal, right? Is the goal like a socializing, like a connection, community thing? Is the goal getting the concept and the ideas and making the player feel and understand those things? Because I feel like, like games are naturally individualistic, isolating sort of things. And it's kind of really difficult to sort of escape that. But that's why, like board games don't do that, or other mediums don't do that as much. But no, there is sort of like, I haven't thought about it that deeply, but a disconnect between sort of like the community aspect of my work and there's not really a community sort of feeling because you are meant to play it alone. But the thing is, because it's, about gods, it's about Palestine, people do share it with each other and talk about it with each other, which I guess is like another way of sort of like feeling and experience a game together. Like, yes, like you could play a game alone, but then you could really just like one of the best things is talking about your experience of like playing that game, right? Like that's where community can come in as well. And I just feel like maybe it's okay sometimes the way things are, if it's like an individualistic thing, but maybe we have to just like have more conversations, not like change like, you know, the structure of the game, like, oh, I should make MMOs now because I want people to hang out, because I don't think that's necessarily true, that like you'll have a better time or conversations or whatever if you're in an MMOs. Like we know a lot of those spaces to be toxic and horrendous. So just because your game lends itself to community, what kind of community are you fostering too is what's really important. And if it sort of, it comes from like, I'll play it alone and then talk to people about it, I think that's a good way of building community as well that is totally valid.
And I think also something I wanted to highlight that you mentioned, that like playing a game that maybe like reflects some kind of like marginalized part of your identity can make you feel closer to your community. Like having an experience with a piece of work that you feel that you can relate to in of itself can open you up to have those conversations and seek out like spaces and people who've also played that game and shared that experience. Michael?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think you're right. We've always spent more time briefing and debriefing video game playing sessions than we actually spend in game. But maybe if the model for board gaming is more like the knitting club, where we come together and do the thing, maybe the model for the video game is more like the book club, where we do the thing first, and then we come together and talk about it and decide what to play next and those kinds of things. And I think the sort of using spaces like this and communities like this is a wonderful way of avoiding all the toxicity and that kind of stuff that can be so debilitating.
Luke, do you have any thoughts on how? Yeah, go ahead. Do how you already do.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of games that are just made to feed into the antisocial culture that we generally have. Like being antisocial extends far beyond just video games. And I mean, let's say you're working. My brother worked at an Amazon warehouse on the floor. He had the midnight to noon shift, and a lot of people, I mean, all they could do was go to work for those 12 hours and then go home and sleep and then go back to work. And that's not really conducive to a very social life and all that. So there's a lot of things in our society that are stopping us from having this deeper and more vibrant culture. I think that's a much broader question than just video games, how to change that. It's really how to transform society. But like what you were saying about your own video game, it's not made to be played for thousands and thousands of hours on your own and all that. It's made to be played on your own, but also I would assume to get you thinking about this, to talk to other people. And yeah, I mean, these games don't exist just within themselves. Having a solo experience or something, there's nothing inherently antisocial about that. But it's really the intention behind the work and the politics of it. Is it a game made so that you can escape and forget and just not think and do that for like thousands of hours? Or is it something that's making you think?
Thank you. And Paolo, I know you also organize an exhibition space that shows games, multiplayer games, I'm assuming single player games as well. Do you have any observations or thoughts on how?
Yeah, that's true. That's great. Organized games, exhibitions, you all. It's fun. It is kind of like in the realm of throwing parties though. Which is great, but it's not the kind of party we need, if you wink. So if I were to sort of like put together all this, try to sort of like synthesize some of these trends, like we are sort of like try to grasp a wide variety of practices. I'm making single player games in coordination with a community. I'm making or studying board games, which are a whole different story. And what about people who play online multiplayer games, but there's there's like a community that emerges into that. Should we basically like intervene in those existing communities and so on? So to me, those are like all of the above, great. But in a more practical and maybe tactical sense, it to me comes down to basically like electing your audience and therefore the purpose of your practice, of your work, your game. Essentially, like, are you trying to talk? Are you trying to connect? What is the degree of radicalization of the person, of your player? Essentially, are you trying to connect with people who are like apolitical, that are like children at some kind of like pre-political stage, and you're trying to instill some kind of like non-psychotic ideas through games that are maybe wholesome and nice. Are you trying to raise awareness? Like that seemed to me like when I started doing making games, that seemed to be the almost implied use for games or all sort of like media, activist media. You have to raise awareness of the issue. And I think we are at a very different stage now in which a lot of issues are pretty well raised, and we need to understand, like we have to maybe raise awareness of the solutions or what we can do about it. Essentially, like what I think that Luke was saying at the beginning, that it needs to also have like some kind of proposition, right? Not just like the critique of the existing, but that's another audience to me. And what I'm sort of like trying to move toward is, or at least like with my main project, is like I'm trying to make games for people who are already engaged in a process of change into some extent, and are already activists, or at the very least already aware. So like not being concerned about, oh no, am I preaching to the choir? It's okay to preach to the choir if you're saying something non-obvious, I guess. For example, like there is an aspect of board games that I always found kind of off-putting, which is the fact that, well, if you want to play a board game, even like a politically engaged board game, it takes time. You have to sort of like gather people. You have to explain the rules. So you have to buy the board game as opposed to sort of like stumbling upon it on the internet, right? So like you're reasonably sure that the people who will gather around you playing this board game will be already basically on your team. At first, for the longest time, I thought that was like essentially a shortcoming, and that's why I'm not making board games. I might play them with my friends, but I don't find them particularly useful for activism. But then, like, I started thinking about, like, okay, well, what you can do, like, there are like things you can do with your friends, with your comrades, sitting around a table. I made exactly one tabletop game that actually kind of sucks, but you should all play it, which is called Rules and Roberts, which is a kind of like a storytelling parody, a bit of a parody of Dungeons and Dragons. And it's meant to teach the parliamentary procedures, Robert's Rule of Orders, that are used in many unions and even like faith groups, socialist meetings, my group that is DSA. And so like basically by playing the game, you're learning collective decision making, essentially. You're learning to be a participant in one of these meetings. And it's a pretty terrible way to play a D&D type of game. But if you are, if everybody around the table is on the joke, sort of like is with you, and I think it works and it has been used in that sense. But there's this aspect of being like, okay, this is a game that maybe 100 people have played. Is that necessarily a failure compared to games that have been played by thousands of people? To me, we kind of like need to move away from the idea that video games need to hit the largest amount of people in any sort of people, because that is a very kind of like commercial mainstream idea of thinking about making games and digital games. So maybe we need smaller games for a few people that are partners in crimes, as well as games that hit millions of children or and so on. So I think it's all of the above, but maybe the more like practical thing is okay, what's if you're a game designer, a game maker, what is your audience, who you want to intervene in?
Yeah, thank you, Paolo. I would like to thank you all. I was feeling very cynical a little bit coming into this. I did a lot of research about like what it means to me for a game to be radical and revolutionary, and I think like as Paolo said, it's easy to fall into the mindset of like to play the numbers game, and if you aren't impacting a wide number of people, that you aren't making an impact. And so I appreciate you all sharing your perspectives and like also highlighting the transportative power of like of yourself in your own work, or like the small community around you. And so thank you for restoring my faith a little bit in games as an activist practice. And I'd like to give you all a round of applause. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for answering all my questions. But we are going to open it up to the audience, who I'm sure has just as many questions as I do. So if anyone has a question, feel free to raise your hand. Go ahead.
I have one. My question is for Yasmine, because one of the singular experiences I had, even when I saw the title of this panel, brought me back to the NYU Game Center showcase this past year, which I know some of you were there, but if you weren't, Pomegranate was showcased there, and it was an incredibly memorable experience. It had come, after a semester of a ton of turmoil and really at sometimes violent, right, confrontation, and it was just so incredible to sit there and experience something like that in that space, and it made me, I'll never forget it. So I was just curious if you could speak maybe a little bit to that experience of showing something like that in that type of space after that type of time. I know it's a huge question, but I was just so touched by that experience and moved by it, and I would love to hear a little bit more about what that was like.
Thank you. Yeah. I always knew that. Is this on?
Just hold it close to your.
Okay. I always knew that I was going to make a game about Palestine. Like, I was like, okay, I'm going to make a game about Palestine. I never, I'm from Gaza, so like, I never thought about making a game about Gaza because it's inaccessible. Like, one, physically can't get there. Two, if you look at Google Images, it's just like, it's really hard to get specific photos. And then, especially if you looked after October 7th, anytime you Google Gaza, it's just destruction. So getting images before October 7th was really difficult. But I knew after October 7th happened, I was like, okay, I have to make this game. Like, there's no way, like, this is the time. And it really pushed me to, it was really difficult. It pushed me to like figure out how to actually do it, because I do a lot of 3D scanning, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to 3D model these things. But it was also extremely emotional because like I'm dealing with my family they're in Egypt now. They got out in March, we got them out, but I'm dealing with my family who are trapped in Gaza, and we're talking every day, and it's just, but I'm like, it's like I have two separate brains or something. I'm like, one brain is like, okay, I'm dealing with that like emotional side, and the other brain is like, I need to do this. I have to do this, because if I don't do this, I will go crazier. Like it's something like an out for myself or some sort of relief, because it's so easy to feel powerless every single day in this country, and thinking of any way that we can sort of like reclaim a little bit of our agencies as like Palestinians, as human beings, is really important to feel anything or to feel alive or like connected to the world. So it was really difficult, and I don't think I would have done it without Wanho, who really just like carried my hand through that whole process and just made it so much better. But I'm always really interested in not recreating the same despair that we see every day, and making sure that we can sort of like have a little bit of like something to believe in, because if we're just like, there's no point of me replicating the despair in my games if we already see it every single day. But I mean, the NYU Game Center was super supportive and really nice and amazing. I mean, I got mad at my classmates one day, but that was, they all forgave me. We all forgave each other. It was beautiful. But yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Hello, I want to go back to something you said early on, Yasmine, about games and imparting like experiential knowledge. I've been thinking a lot about like knowledge acquisition these past couple of weeks, and I felt very firmly that like there's a stark difference between believing something intellectually and believing something like in your body, like embodied knowledge. And I'm wondering maybe if the realm that games can sort of be most useful in is in that second realm of creating a space where somebody has an experience that really codifies something that they already believe into something that becomes a conviction that they really feel. So I'm just curious about other people's thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that's way more likely, and that makes, I mean, like, a lot of the time when you're interacting with anything, you're never gonna be interacting with something that, like, you absolutely hate or have, like, no knowledge on. You usually come from a place that you're interacting with it in the first place because you already have that sort of baseline interest, right? So I think it definitely strengthens in, like, that interest or that, like, belief or feeling. And I think that's a good point. It does a better job at that than just like what we think games to be, where it's like, oh, these like naive, like nude people who know nothing, like, you know, and then they're gonna walk away being like, I believe all of that now. That is like less likely to happen and way more likely to happen if you already come from just like a little bit moving sort of that way. I'm not sure if I answered that, but yeah, okay, cool.
Yes, Flan, we have questions online.
Yes, we have a stream question coming through. This one comes from TT Rejectory. They're asking, what do you see as more productive, subverting or trying to fix existing flawed genres, for example, 4X games and colonialism, to critique them and expose them for what they are, when their underlying assumptions might render them fundamentally flawed, versus trying to invent entirely new and equally fun methods of interaction, when that's much more difficult and likely to fail than building on what we know works in terms of making something fun to play. Also just kind of like my own additional note to this question, because I feel like it's related. Like, I'm kind of curious what Paolo has to say about this, because your games, like, I think a lot of them put you in the role of the exploiter, right? Like, they kind of piggyback off of the traditional, like, expansion growth mechanics that a lot of games have, like Mikael was talking about in board games. And I'm wondering, like, why you kind of chose to go that route as a way of, like, educating people. And I think that kind of goes along with this Twitch question as well.
I've been trying to fix existing flawed genre for like 20 years, and I have not succeeded, so maybe let's try something else. As you can see all around, I would say, you know, both approaches are good. I think it's I would strongly recommend to start from some kind of baseline of genre or systems that are already sort of like working in a way that, for like a whole variety of both like technical and just like persuasive reasons in a way. So like my strategy is often starting from a genre and then sort of like try to be the antidote to that genre, or trying to sort of like be like, oh, here's what's wrong about this genre. Here's how, you know, colonialism and capitalism sort of like informs the genre, and how would that, like, either like exposing it or, you know, blowing up a little bit, making it more visible, or imagining a sort of like an alternative to that, but still within the same kind of mechanic. So I think it's a pretty valid type of strategy and approach. coming up with entirely new, also try to come up with entirely new genres and methods of interaction, but I think that's much harder because you are dealing with the whole you're trying to make something that is compelling, you're trying to make something that works, which is already pretty difficult. And then you're trying to make something that is compelling, that is already very hard, and everybody else is also trying to do that. And then you're also trying to make something that makes sense in a higher way, I guess, like in a more like intellectual way, I guess, or emotional way. So you're sort of like compounding a whole series of challenges that I think can be quite hard. I do believe that new ideas require new forms. So it just doesn't have to be entirely new. I don't think it has to be always kind of like a break with the tradition, essentially.
Michael, do you have any thoughts on some board games?
Yes, well, I see it as a part of my role being an academic to actually sort of present that critique as strongly as possible so others can kind of point to the book and say, see, MIT says this is wrong. I think that comes with a privilege that you have as an MIT professor. But what excites me is probably playing games that are subverting these genres or trying to step outside of them and create new things. And I think making the Promesa board game was a bit of a vent for me and my RAs who came to MIT and the MIT Game Lab because they love playing video games mostly, and then they spent 2 years playing colonialist-themed board games. So at some point we were like, okay, let's do a counter image. Let's do something creatively and differently, just a little bit to keep us from going more insane, as you said, Jasmine. So I think it's the role I've been put in, for better or worse.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, let's see you in the back in the black shirt.
Hi, so this is mostly a question for Paolo, although this resonates with a lot of us in the work as well. I need to apologize firsthand because I made a game against Empire 7 years ago, and this question has repeatedly almost killed me. So bear with me here. Given that, like for most video games, the appeal is obvious and immediate, it's like people get to socialize, people take pleasure from playing a game. When you're dealing with games that have more difficult or like emotionally uncomfortable political material, and the medium of the game for you is a way, as Paolo mentioned before, to explore the complexities of this politically difficult thing. How do you encourage people to actually engage with your game, to go beyond to like, oh wow, it's really cool that you made this thing, and then there's articles published about everywhere and nobody has played it?
Did you hear that, Paolo?
Sorry, I did not. Can you? There was some.
Yes.
Reverb.
Essentially, games that are put you in a more like emotionally uncomfortable space that like is like difficult to navigate. That is supposed to make the player uncomfortable. How do you get people to engage with your work that is not very comfortable for the player?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering like if really like being comfortable is really one of the main characteristics of games or the appeal of games. Like I can think of a lot of very popular games in which you're not really comfortable. So I think there is a lot of play in that, like a lot of like freedom of movement in that. But I don't know, but also like I don't know if I really like enter really that area because my games are a little bit aloof, tend to be, even when they are storytelling and let's say emotional sometimes. Or like I don't really put myself in it, or I don't think my position is particularly interested to explore, or I have anything really viscerally uncomfortable to say. So I'm kind of more interested to hear from the other panelists and answer to this.
Cass, do you have any thoughts on this? Because Onto Amazing Land into Infinity is a game that can make the player very uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think it's something I've had to think about a lot and kind of confront with that game because, I had to ask myself this question too. Why should I make something that makes me this uncomfortable? And I think I came to a similar idea as Gabbah had said, almost coming to a level of obsession with making this thing where, it felt as if either I would have to keep developing this thing or I would have this part of my brain that I just didn't know what to do with. And I don't think that's a completely uncommon experience. I think for some people this might be uncomfortable. I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of people living with a similar discomfort as myself, right? When we talk about revealing a part of our identity that is marginalized and picking a particular audience, I think we're making choices there that on one hand we know that there's going to be people who either can sympathize or empathize with the work because they've experienced something quite similar. In my case, whether it's the loss of a family member in a similar way, or a similar kind of, exile trauma or war even. But, also I think to challenge people who don't have that experience to step into those shoes. I think, like Paolo even said, a lot of people don't seek comfort in games. Horror games are very popular, I think, for a reason. Sometimes people like to be scared, and there's a catharsis, right? And I think discomfort that leads to catharsis is also there's something kind of addicting about that, right? Whether or not you have that experience or not. And so I think horror is really, for me, I think I found out, linked to also tragedy, right? That's something that can present itself as horror, take the genre trappings maybe of horror, which a lot of people might not be that interested in making a horror game. Actually there's something very similar about tragedy, real tragedy. It's not easy to live with, and I think, just connecting back to the overall theme of the panel, I think anti-imperialism arrives out of that, right? It's a natural reaction to the sort of horror we see all around us. It's an obvious result of people manipulating reality and destroying families all around the world. The end result is resistance. The end result is people will no longer live with this discomfort. They'll change it.
Thank you, Cass and Paolo. Any other questions? We have time maybe for one more. You right here. You have we got
Thanks. So we talked already about how games are different from other media. I think that games also have a lot of similarities with, for example, novels are also largely consumed individually and aim to create psychological intimacy. Or movies, like you mentioned, also create immersive experiences. So I'm curious about how in your practices you draw from the techniques of other media that might have a longer history of grappling with these questions.
For Cass and Paolo, if you didn't hear, what is your experience with borrowing or engaging with other media outside of games in order to grapple with these questions? Are there things that you borrowed or learned from different mediums that help you in your work as game developers? Thoughts?
I also teach games criticism, and when I do, we greatly borrow both from literature studies but also from film studies, because they have such a long, rich history of critiquing these cultural artifacts, and video game criticism is still struggling somehow with some kind of birth defects, I think, that makes us have to look beyond games criticism to really understand what a robust version of relaying media experiences back to an audience to enrich the cultural practice around it means. So in that regard, I think we always have to be careful in what we borrow, and so we don't limit ourselves in our understanding in this unique cultural form, but still we have so much to learn from those practices.
Thank you. Do you have any thoughts, Paolo or Kas? Other media? Well, I think we probably have time for one more.
I love other medias.
Yeah.
My favorite media are all of them except for video games.
Engaged from them all. Another question right there, please.
Hi. So yeah, I had a question about specifically like dealing with, you know, like with games, like YouTube has become such a big component of how people are exposed to and react to games, and oftentimes it's being translated by people who don't know anything about what they're talking about. They don't know like what the original context of the thing is, and so and also, you know, as part of social media, it kind of is a venue to like leverage harassment against people who are maybe coming from marginalized groups. So how do you deal with like the social media and these structures kind of blowing up the continuity, like the solidarity that people are feeling? Because I feel like that was has been a big problem, and make sure that there's like support and you know a maintained sense of continuity, and that people have a way, there's some kind of way of collectively dealing with that so that it doesn't like destroy the larger, you know, people's larger goals, because this stuff is so much bigger, you know.
Yeah, so how do you deal with social media, online spaces that might be pushing back against what you make, and might be like engaging in like hate and inappropriate comments against marginalized creators, work, etc.?
So I'm still on Twitter, and I'm not gonna get off because I don't know. Maybe I like to torture myself or something, but I need to see it. I need to be aware of what the other crazy people are talking about, because if I'm not aware, then I'm just like in a giant echo chamber where everyone's supporting and saying yes, good job to everyone, which is great, beautiful, love that. But I think that it's also important to pay attention to all sorts of like opinions and conversations that are happening. And it does drive me crazy. I mean, I see people like straight up deny my existence and humanity every single day. But I don't know. I think it's like, I need to know that those people exist out there, because otherwise I would never know. Like with my community, every day, everyone's supportive and loving and stuff. And I don't ever want to be caught in a situation where I'm like taken off guard from that sort of thing. So I guess I just deal with it by making myself face it all the time. Because if I don't face it, then I'm just tucking it away, which is so much easier to do, especially in our like hyper individualistic like echo chamber societies where we do want people like us. We do want, you know, everything to be similar to us. So yeah, I don't know, maybe I like to torture myself, but I think it's important to be aware of what's happening around you. And it's like, you know, it's like, oh, Trump won the election and everyone's shocked. Everyone thought Kamala was gonna win. But if you were on Twitter, you would see that like the majority of people are not supporting, you know, whatever, the current Democratic Party and stuff like that, and are turning more right wing. So, I don't know, it's all there for you to see, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your thoughtful answers. Can we give our panel another round of applause? Thank you again so much for being here. I feel like such a privilege that I got to be part of this conversation and speak with you all. So for everyone else, thank you all so much for coming as well. Again, we talked so much about how important it is to have these spaces and these conversations, and just coming and supporting a space like Boshi's, like Night City, is a part of how we can keep this work going and keep asking these questions. So you are welcome to come or to stay here at Boshi's until 10 p.m. You can get a non-alcoholic drink from the bar, but also we have another Game Design Days event going on at Hex House nearby, hosted by Arcade Commons. So if you're interested in checking out another event, there's one down the road. Please donate and sign up through Camaraderie for more Boshi's events. If you enjoyed this event, your support means a ton, and for these events to keep happening, that support is necessary. So go to their website, go to their social medias, talk to some of the great, raise your hand if you're a member of Boshi's. Yeah, Boshi's. Yes, round of applause. Feel free to talk to any of these people who can direct you to more resources and places where they might need support. Please, if you are interested in donating to PYM, Yusuf will be by the door as we exit and hang out in this space. And you can also go to Grimm's next door to meet up if you want a place to like chill out after this panel. Thank you all again so much. We'll see you on Thursday. Please come back for the games showcase that features a New York Times Simulator by Paolo, that features Onto Amazyland and Unto Infinity by Kas, and it also features Pomegranates by Yasmine, Gabbah, Baya. And so please come out to that show on Thursday night at 7 p.m. here in the same space. We hope to see you in the future. Thank you so much for coming.